The steel barrier hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Emily Carter didn't make a noise when her shoulder connected with the metal edge. She just dropped to one knee, head down, hair fallen across her face. 300 soldiers went completely silent. Then the laughter started. Low at first, then spreading fast across the gymnasium like something contagious. Master Sergeant Ethan Cole stood over her, arms crossed, grinning wide enough to show the gap in his back molars. "Somebody help the nurse back to her ward." Emily raised her head slowly. The laughter died the moment they saw her eyes. If this story already has your attention, follow the channel, hit like, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. Emily Carter had been awake for 19 hours when she submitted her tournament entry form. She did it at 0600, standing at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor of Redstone Military Medical Center, still in her scrubs from a night shift that had gone sideways around 200 when a private first class came in seizing and the attending physician had been 40 minutes out. She'd managed the situation. She always managed the situation. That was the problem, actually. She'd been managing situations quietly for 2 years at Redstone, and nobody had noticed enough to care. She printed the form, signed it with her left hand because her right was still wrapped, from where she'd caught the edge of a cabinet door 4 days earlier, and slid it under the tournament coordinator's door before the man even arrived for his shift. Then she went back to her patients. Redstone Military Medical Center sat on the eastern edge of Ashford, Montana, a mid-sized base town that survived on military contracts, trucking routes, and a stubborn refusal to modernize. The hospital occupied a converted administrative block, 3 stories of beige concrete and fluorescent lighting, perpetually understaffed and perpetually pretending otherwise. The staff was a mix of military personnel and civilian contractors, and the gap between those two groups was exactly as wide and uncomfortable as anyone would expect. Emily was a civilian contractor, had been, officially, for the past 2 years. She was 30 years old, medium height, with the kind of build that people described as sturdy when they were being polite and compact when they weren't paying attention. She kept her brown hair pulled back in a way that communicated zero interest in discussion. She didn't wear jewelry on shift. She didn't make small talk in the break room unless she needed something specific. Her patient satisfaction scores were the highest in the department, which several of her supervisors had found vaguely irritating. She had a room in the base's civilian contractor housing, a 12 by 14 space with a single window facing the motor pool. She ran 5 miles every morning at 0530 before the base truly woke up. She ate at the staff cafeteria, paid for her own coffee, and attended exactly as many social functions as her contract required. Nobody at Redstone knew where she'd come from before the hospital. Her file, if anyone had bothered to pull it, listed a nursing program in Oregon, 2 years of ER work in Portland, and a clean background check. The file was not a lie, exactly. It was just not the whole truth. The tournament was an annual thing, the Redstone Invitational hand-to-hand combat competition, which the base took far more seriously than the name suggested. It ran over 3 weekends in October, organized brackets, refereed bouts, the whole structure. Military personnel competed in their weight and rank categories. Civilians could enter an open division, theoretically, though in practice the open division hadn't seen a civilian entrant in 6 years because the last one had broken his collarbone in the first round, and the story had circulated ever since. The entry coordinator, Specialist Donna Baird, called Emily's extension at 0800 that same morning. "Ms. Carter." "Emily Carter, 3rd floor nursing?" "That's me." "I'm looking at a tournament entry form from you. Did you mean to submit this?" "Yes." A pause. "Okay. It's just that the open division it's pretty competitive, and I read the rules. I meet the entry requirements." Another pause. Longer. "Yes, ma'am. You do. I'll process it today." The form was processed, the bracket was posted, and by the following morning, Emily's name next to the open division slot had been screenshot, printed, taped to a bulletin board outside the base gym, and annotated in marker "Shout, Hospital Nurse LOL," in handwriting that belonged to at least 3 different people based on the varying pressure. She saw it at 0535 on her morning run. She kept running. Quote, Ethan Cole was the kind of man who had been impressive once and had spent the subsequent decade making sure everyone remembered it. He was 43, a master sergeant with 21 years in, decorated in 2 theaters, built like a vending machine, and about as warm. He ran the physical training program at Redstone and had, over the years, quietly expanded his authority into adjacent areas in the way that certain men do, through availability, volume, and the particular social gravity of someone who never seems to doubt himself in public. He was also the defending tournament champion, 3 years running. When word reached him about the entry form, he was in the middle of a conditioning session with a group of junior enlisted soldiers. One of his trainers, Corporal Mac Delgado, showed him the bracket on a tablet, grinning, waiting for the reaction. Cole looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he handed the tablet back. "Emily Carter," he said, "3rd floor nursing." "Yes, Sergeant." "She know what division she entered?" "Apparently." Cole went back to the session for another 30 seconds. Then he said, without turning around, "Pull up whatever she filed. I want to see her listed qualifications." Delgado pulled them up, read them off. Portland ER experience, nursing certification, clean bill of health. "Nothing else?" "Nothing on file." Cole picked up a barbell that would have made most men reconsider their choices and put it back down with controlled efficiency. "Tell the guys not to draw her in the first round," he said. "I want that bracket slot myself." Delgado blinked. "You want to?" "First match. I'll handle it." He picked up the barbell again. "She should understand what she signed up for before she embarrasses herself in front of the whole base." Nishamats. The first weekend of the tournament arrived with the particular cold clarity that Montana Octobers carried, the kind of air that came in through gaps in the gym's exterior wall and reminded you that summer was a memory and winter was not asking permission. The gym was packed beyond its official capacity. Word had traveled far enough that people came specifically for the open division bracket, which was unusual. Normally, the open division was background noise. Emily arrived 40 minutes before her first match in worn athletic shorts and a gray long-sleeve base layer. She carried her own hand wraps, which she applied herself in a corner of the warm-up area with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it several thousand times. She didn't speak to anyone. She stretched methodically, working through a sequence that was efficient and notably thorough. Hip flexors, thoracic rotation, shoulder mobility drills that a physical therapist would have recognized as specific rather than generic. 3 rows up in the bleachers, 4 men sat together who did not look like they belonged to any unit currently stationed at Redstone. They were civilian clothes, not the kind that base personnel wore on their days off, but clothes that were specifically chosen to be unremarkable, which is a different thing. They sat with their backs to the wall. Each of them held a cup of coffee. None of them looked at their phones. Their eyes tracked the warm-up area with the particular quality of attention that is not casual. None of them spoke to each other during the first match. That first match was a sergeant from the MP battalion, 6'2", probably 220. He came out loose and confident, treating the bout like something that was already over. The referee called the start. Emily moved differently than anyone in the gym expected. It wasn't flashy. That was the first surprise. She didn't come out aggressive, didn't try to establish size or presence. She gave ground on the first 2 exchanges in a way that looked, from a distance, like retreat. And the sergeant pressed forward because that's what you do when someone gives ground. And then something happened with his arm that the people in the front row couldn't quite reconstruct afterward. He went down. He got up, expression recalibrated. He came in differently the second time. The bout lasted 6 minutes. Emily won by submission. The gym was not quiet exactly, but the quality of noise changed. The sergeant shook her hand with a look on his face that suggested he was revising a mental category. Her second match was 40 minutes later. Another military entrant, this one with a combat sports background that Delgado had quietly noted in her bracket information. He came in technically, which was smart. He also came in assuming that her first win had been lucky, which was not. She won in 4 minutes this time. By the third match, the section of the bleachers where Cole sat had gone noticeably quiet. Cole hadn't moved. He sat with his forearms on his knees, watching with the particular stillness of a man recalculating. Delgado beside him opened his mouth twice and thought better of it both times. In the warm-up area between matches, Emily sat on a bench, unwrapped and rewrapped her right hand, drank half a bottle of water, and stared at a specific point on the middle distance floor that contained nothing except her own thoughts. A younger nurse from the second floor, Rosa Vela, who had come to watch, slid along the bench toward her. Emily, those are soldiers. I know. Where did you learn to, the form said nursing school. Rosa. Emily looked at her, not unkind, but direct. I need to focus. Rosa went back to the bleachers. The four men in unremarkable civilian clothes watched this exchange. One of them, the oldest, with gray at his temples, made a notation in a small paper notebook that he then folded shut and put in his jacket pocket. The confrontation with Cole happened after the third-round bracket results were posted, in the corridor outside the gym, where the vending machines hummed and the fluorescent light above the water fountain had been flickering since August without anyone fixing it. Cole came out of the gym with Delgado 2 steps behind him, which was how Cole typically moved through spaces he considered his own. Emily was standing at the water fountain, waiting for it to cool the water before she drank, which took a moment because the plumbing in the building was original. Carter, Cole said. She turned. He was taller than her by 8 inches and had probably 100 pounds on her. He made no particular effort to position himself in a way that wasn't somewhat physical. You've had a nice run today, he said. Those are good kids. Don't read too much into it. Emily drank her water. I don't know what I'd be reading into it. The brackets got you down for semifinals next weekend. He paused. I want to give you an opportunity to reconsider before that. Reconsider what? Cole tilted his head the way that some people tilt their heads when they're pretending to consider something they've already decided. You work in my hospital, he said. I don't mean that literally. I know you're contracted through nursing services, but functionally, you understand what I mean. She understood exactly what he meant. I submitted a valid entry form. I've won 3 bouts inside the rules. What specifically are you suggesting I reconsider? The flicker from the light overhead, the hum of the Pepsi machine. Don't make this uncomfortable for yourself, Cole said, quiet enough that it didn't carry to anyone else in the corridor. You're good. You've made your point. Nobody's going to take that away from you. He said the word nobody in a way that implied the opposite. Think about what continuing past next weekend does to your working relationships here. That's all I'm saying. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I'll see you in the bracket, Sergeant. She went back into the gym. Cole watched the door close behind her. His jaw worked slightly. Then he said to Delgado flatly, Find out everything in her personnel file. Every performance review, every complaint, every accommodation request. Everything. Chet. What followed the first weekend was harder to see directly, which is usually how it works. The wrapping tape in Emily's assigned equipment locker disappeared. Not all of it. 2 rolls remained, but the third, which she'd just opened, was gone. She used what she had and bought more at the commissary. The replacement roll was a different brand and slightly narrower, which matters when you've spent years developing specific wrapping habits, but it was manageable. On Wednesday, Dr. Philip Rast, the chief of medical staff, a civilian physician who had been at Redstone for 9 years and had survived that long by being specifically useful to specific people, called Emily into his office for what he described as a check-in. The office had a window that faced the parking lot and a framed commendation on the wall that Rast touched sometimes when he was nervous. He was touching it when Emily sat down. I've been getting some informal feedback, he said, about the tournament. What kind of feedback? He adjusted the frame slightly, though it was already straight. There's a perception in some quarters that the participation is that it reflects a certain judgment issue, with regard to professional context. Emily sat with her hands in her lap and her face doing nothing particular. My contract doesn't include conduct restrictions on recreational activity outside of working hours. No, it doesn't. You're right. He exhaled. But Redstone's a community, and community dynamics. Dr. Rast, she kept her voice level. Is there a specific complaint, filed formally, referencing a specific breach of conduct? He looked at the commendation again. No. Then what's happening in this meeting? The silence that followed was the kind where you can hear the parking lot through the glass. A truck backing up somewhere. A radio. Be careful, Rast said, and it came out stripped of the professional coding, just the words underneath. Not everyone finds this as straightforward as you do. Emily stood. Thank you for the check-in. Man. The note appeared under her door on Thursday night. She found it at 05:30 when she left for her run. A single sheet of standard printer paper folded once. Withdraw before next weekend or you won't like what comes next. No signature. The handwriting was blocked and deliberate in the way that people write when they're trying not to be identified, which ironically makes the handwriting more distinctive, not less. She photographed it with her phone, folded it back along its original crease, and took it with her on the run. She logged 5 miles at a pace that most people at Redstone couldn't have matched fresh, let alone at 05:30 after a 12-hour shift. She came back, showered, ate a protein bar over her kitchen sink, and went to work. She did not withdraw. The second weekend of the tournament drew a larger crowd than the first, which the base hadn't seen in 5 years. People came who ordinarily had better things to do on Saturday mornings. The bleachers were over capacity by 0900. Someone had propped open the emergency exit to allow overflow standing room, which was technically a fire code issue, but nobody was addressing it. Emily moved through the semi-finals bracket with the same quality she'd brought to the first weekend, controlled, economical, without any particular drama. She wasn't performing. That was the specific quality that made people uneasy. Most competitors, even experienced ones, perform slightly. They carry some awareness of the audience. Emily competed as if the gymnasium walls didn't exist. She corrected errors mid-sequence with the mechanical candor of someone running diagnostics. When she took a hit, and she did take hits because she was not invulnerable and her opponents were not amateurs, she assessed the damage, adjusted, and continued. She won both semifinals matches. Cole was in the championship bracket. He had come through his side without difficulty, which was not a surprise. He was genuinely skilled, had genuinely earned his record, and whatever else was true about him, he knew how to compete. His matches had been clean. He looked, in the warm-up area before the championship bout, like someone who had been waiting for a specific conversation and had finally gotten it scheduled. The 4 men in the civilian clothes were there again. Same seats, different coffee cups. The one with gray temples had no notebook visible today, but he sat forward slightly, elbows on knees, watching Emily warm up. The bout started at 1100. For the first 90 seconds, it was tactical on both sides. Range management, probing exchanges, each of them making specific observations about the other's patterns. Cole was bigger and had reach. He used both intelligently. Emily was faster with specific advantage in transition speed, the time between a defended strike and the counter. The crowd had gone genuinely quiet in the way that crowds do when they realize they're watching something real. At the 2-minute mark, Cole shifted into a grappling exchange and used his weight advantage effectively, controlling the clinch, working Emily toward the mat in a way that was technically legal and physically considerable. She defended with enough precision to hold position without spending energy she didn't have. Then, at 2:40, Cole did something that the referee caught too late. It was a joint lock. The knee, specifically, applied at an angle and with a velocity that pushed past the tournament's controlled technique rule. It was fast enough to look like a competition move. It was targeted at a specific structural point with specific intent. Emily felt the angle, processed what was happening in the half-second before impact, and did something that nobody in the gymnasium had seen done outside of specialized training environments. She went with the lock instead of against it, rotating her body in a way that sacrificed her positioned balance to kill the mechanical advantage of the angle, a counter-response that required knowing exactly where the technique was going before it fully arrived. The lock failed. She came up from the mat with a sequence that lasted 4 seconds and resulted in Cole on his back, one arm controlled, her weight distribution perfect. The referee called it. The gym was very still. Then the noise came, and it wasn't laughter. In the third row of the bleachers, the man with gray temples reached slowly for his phone. He didn't make a call. He sent a text, 7 words, and put the phone back in his pocket. Cole got up. His face had changed in a way that went past competition loss into something that had been personal for a while. He left the mat without the customary handshake. 3 of his staff followed him out. Emily stood in the center of the mat. The referee raised her hand. She looked at the gesture with the expression of someone being told something they already knew. The suspension notice arrived Monday morning. It was 2 pages, printed on hospital letterhead, Dr. Rast's signature at the bottom, alongside a name Emily recognized from the administrative wing. Deputy Superintendent Colonel Warren Briggs, whose jurisdiction technically didn't extend to contracted nursing staff, but whose signature had somehow appeared anyway. The grounds were listed as conduct unbecoming of a medical professional, creation of a hostile work environment, and conduct prejudicial to the good order and function of Redstone Military Medical Center. The language was specific in vocabulary and vague in substance, which is a particular kind of document that requires a particular kind of author. She was to surrender her hospital access card by 1700 that day. She would remain off-site pending investigation. Emily read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table, put a glass of water on top of it to keep it flat, and sat for a few minutes doing nothing except looking out the window at the motor pool. Her neighbor in the contractor housing, a middle-aged IT contractor named Frank Oleski, knocked on the shared wall at some point. Their building code for, "I heard something, are you okay?" She knocked back twice, which meant fine. She heard him move away from the wall. She picked up her phone and called a number she hadn't used in 14 months. It rang 4 times. "This is Hale," said the voice on the other end. Low, unhurried, with the particular quality of someone whose attention is always already on something else. "It's Carter." A brief pause. "I've been watching the bracket scores. I figured." "You weren't subtle." "No," Emily said. "I wasn't." She looked at the suspension notice under the glass. "They're moving fast. Formal misconduct filing before the week's out, probably." "Probably," Hale agreed. "I need to know if the timeline's a problem." Another pause, this one different in quality. "There are people already on site," Hale said. "Have been since last weekend. I don't think timeline is your primary concern right now." Emily processed that. "The 4 civilians in the bleachers. You spotted them the first day." "Second match." "Of course you did." Something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "Carter, sit tight and keep your access card. I was told to surrender it by 1700. I know what you were told." His voice didn't change. "Keep it." The line went dead. Emily set the phone on the table next to the suspension notice. She picked up the glass, drank the rest of the water, and started going through the sequence of what happened next in her head with the same methodology she brought to everything else. Not hoping for a particular outcome, just identifying variables, pressure points, what she could control and what she couldn't. It was a short list currently, but it wasn't empty. She had surrendered her hospital access card by exactly 1700, despite what Hale had said, because she was not going to add insubordination to a document that was already building a case. She'd walked to the security desk, handed it over, and signed the receipt. The security officer, a young specialist who clearly knew what was happening and was pretending not to, had been careful not to meet her eyes. That was Monday. Tuesday was quieter than she'd expected. Wednesday, she went for her morning run and noticed the vehicle. Gray sedan, base plates, parked 40 meters past its usual position relative to the motor pool. Someone had been doing periodic by her building. Amateur surveillance, but it was there. She ran her 5 miles and came back and made coffee. On Wednesday afternoon, the misconduct charges arrived by certified mail, 3 pages, filed under Cole's name with Briggs as co-signatory. The specific allegations were detailed enough that someone had spent real time constructing them. Timestamps, incident numbers, references to procedures she had allegedly violated. It was the kind of document that requires either genuine evidence or someone who knows how forms work well enough to make absence look like presence. She photographed every page, sent the photos to a number she'd stored under a contact name that said dry cleaning. That evening, Rosa Vela knocked on her door. Emily opened it to find Rosa in civilian clothes, carrying a foil-covered dish with both hands, looking like someone who had rehearsed an exit strategy and was already second-guessing it. "I made too much casserole," Rosa said. "Allegedly." Emily opened the door wider. Rosa came in, set the dish on the counter, and then stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, looking at the suspension notice, which was still on the table because Emily hadn't moved it. "I heard about the charges," Rosa said. "Word travels." "It's a hospital. Word does nothing but travel." She looked at Emily directly. "3 other nurses came to me. On their own, separately this week. All of them have had, she paused, finding the word, situations. With Cole or with Briggs's office. Stuff that got filed away or disappeared. Emily looked at her. Nobody said anything before because Rosa stopped, started again. You know why. You know exactly why. I do, Emily said. Are you going to be okay? Emily considered the question with the same methodology she applied to everything else. The charges. The surveillance. Hale's voice on the phone saying there are people already on site. The 4 men in the bleachers who had sat with their backs to the wall and their attention fully forward. I think so, she said. Rosa nodded once. Then, with the specific practicality of a person who has processed something and moved past it. The casserole needs 20 minutes at 350. She left. Emily stood in her kitchen in the quiet after the door closed, the suspension notice on the table, the charges photographed and sent, the motor pool visible through the window in the long horizontal light of a Montana evening in October. Somewhere on the other side of the base, in a gym that still smelled of the weekend's competition, equipment was being broken down and stored. The bracket results were posted on the bulletin board with Emily's name at the top of the open division column, which nobody had taken down yet. In a conference room in the administrative wing, 3 men she hadn't met were looking at a file that was considerably thicker than the one in her hospital personnel record. And in the training facility adjacent to the South Motor Lot, at 2140 on a Wednesday night, Ethan Cole was running drills with a group of junior enlisted soldiers who had no idea that by the end of the week, their commanding trainer's career was going to hinge on what happened in a trauma bay that none of them knew existed yet, and on the decisions of a woman he had shoved into a steel barrier in front of 300 people and expected to stay down. The explosion happened at 0347 Thursday morning. It started in the fuel management section of the training facility's mechanical room. A combination of a pressure fault that had been logged and unaddressed for 6 weeks, a maintenance oversight that 3 separate supervisors had signed off on without reading, and the particular bad luck that places the wrong person in the wrong corridor at the exact moment physics stops being theoretical. The sound reached Emily's room as a low concussive thud that she was sitting up for before she was fully awake, because some categories of sound bypass consciousness entirely. She was at the window before the second secondary. The glow was visible over the south roofline. She was already reaching for her bag. Her access card was on the table where she'd put it after the security desk receipt. The card she'd officially surrendered. The one she was holding now was different. It looked identical, but it wasn't the same card, and she hadn't had it in her possession since a dry cleaning pickup 14 months ago until a paper bag had appeared outside her door Tuesday morning containing exactly one item. She ran. She ran the half-mile to the training facility in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, which was not her best time, but the ground was uneven in the dark, and she was carrying the bag. The scene when she arrived was the specific kind of chaos that happens in the first 4 minutes after a large explosion before anyone has established command. People running in directions that contradicted each other, someone on a radio repeating the same location coordinates to someone who wasn't responding. A vehicle with its lights on pointing the wrong way so that it illuminated a wall instead of the building. Smoke was coming from the mechanical room on the south side, heavy and low, the kind that sits in your lungs and doesn't negotiate. There was fire visible through 2 windows on the ground level, and the structural wall on the east corner had partially collapsed inward. Emily scanned the scene for 6 seconds. Then she went toward the building. A corporal she didn't know by name grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, you can't—" "Who's in there?" He blinked. Sergeant Cole's crew was doing a late drill. There were maybe 6. She was already moving. The east entrance was compromised by the wall collapse, but the north door was intact, just smoke-heavy. She pulled her shirt over her nose, which helped approximately nothing, but was better than nothing, and went in. The hallway was dark except for the emergency lighting, which had come on at half capacity and was flickering. Somewhere to her left, something was burning with the specific sound of a fire that has found something it likes. She heard a voice before she saw anyone. A low, sustained sound that was not quite coherent, which told her 2 things simultaneously, conscious and in pain. She followed it. The mechanical room door was off its hinges and the frame was deformed. which meant the pressure event had originated close. Inside, two men were down. One was sitting against the far wall with his hand pressed to his head, blood coming through his fingers in the steady way that scalp wounds produce. Alarming looking, probably manageable. The other was on the floor face up, and Emily crossed to him in 4 steps and dropped to her knees. It was Cole. She would process the specific irony of that later. Right now, she processed the clinical picture. Burns on both forearms, the way he was breathing told her right side. Probable pneumothorax developing. His left leg was at an angle that his femur did not permit naturally. His color was wrong in the way that indicated internal bleeding rather than external, which was the more pressing concern. "Cole," she said. His eyes were open. He looked at her with the particular confusion of someone whose mental model of the world has just been structurally revised. "Carter," he said, and it came out as barely syllables. "Don't talk. I need you to stay with me." "What are you—" I said, "Don't talk." She had the bag open. She was already moving through the sequence that her hands knew without being asked. Airway assessment, the specific way she positioned her fingers to check pulse quality, the calculation running in the back of her mind that converted his color and respiration rate into a timeline with diminishing returns. The man against the wall said, "There's 2 more. Back corridor." Emily looked at him. He was 22, maybe 23, keeping it together better than most people would in the same situation. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." "Go out the north door, turn left, tell whoever's in charge that you have at least 3 casualties with 1 critical requiring surgical intervention and that I need a crash cart and a trauma team at this location in the next 6 minutes." She paused. "Can you remember all of that?" 3 casualties, 1 critical, crash cart, trauma team, 6 minutes. "Go!" He went. She went back to Cole, who was trying to say something and whose blood pressure, based on everything she could read without equipment, was dropping in the direction that ends conversations. She had what she had in the bag, which was not a trauma bay but was more than most people would have carried into a burning building at 03:47 on a Thursday morning. And she used it with the efficient specificity of someone who had made these decisions in conditions considerably worse than this. The needle decompression she performed in the flickering emergency light, by feel as much as sight, was the kind of procedure that nursing school teaches in theory and that combat teaches in practice. And the difference between those 2 versions is approximately the difference between reading about swimming and being in water. She had learned hers in water. Cole's breathing changed immediately. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just the quality shifted from the mechanical struggle she'd been tracking to something that had a little more room in it. Not fixed, stabilized toward the possibility of surviving the next 15 minutes if the trauma team got here. She was applying direct pressure to his left leg when the first responders came through the north door. The trauma bay at Redstone Medical was not large. It had been designed for the level of emergency the base's administrative planners had anticipated, which was a different level than what arrived through the doors at 4:11 Thursday morning. Cole came in on the gurney with Emily alongside, her hands not leaving the pressure point, giving a report to the ER attending, Dr. James Farwell, 51, reading glasses pushed up on his head, who had been woken by the explosion and arrived 3 minutes ahead of the ambulance, in the specific compressed language of field medicine. Adult male, 43, blast injury, burns bilateral forearms superficial to partial thickness, right side pneumothorax decompressed in field, suspected femur fracture left. Abdomen rigid on palpation, BP dropping, GCS was 14 on scene. I've seen it slide. Farwell looked at her. He had been at Redstone 7 years and had worked 2 shifts alongside Emily Carter and considered her a competent nurse. The report she had just delivered did not come from 2 shifts alongside her. "You decompressed in field," he said, not as a question. "North door of the mechanical room. Needle thoracostomy, 2nd intercostal." He processed that for roughly 1 second. Then, "What's the internal bleed source?" "I don't have imaging. Clinical picture reads spleen or liver, spleen more likely based on mechanism." Farwell turned to his team. "Get OR on the phone. Now. I want a surgical consult in this room in 4 minutes." Emily stepped back from the gurney because that was the appropriate move. The trauma team was here, Cole was in their hands, and her role in the next phase was to not be in the way. She stepped back until she was at the edge of the trauma bay and found that her hands were shaking slightly, which she noted and set aside because there wasn't anything useful to do about it right now. Someone touched her arm. She turned. It was the man with gray temples. Up close, he was older than he'd looked from the bleachers. Late 50s, clean-shaven, with eyes that had the specific quality of someone who spent considerable professional time being unreadable. He was in the same unremarkable civilian jacket. He was holding, in his left hand, a credentials case that he didn't open but held at a specific angle that let her see the edge of what was inside. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was exactly as low as it had been from across the gymnasium. "You're Hale's people," Emily said. "We're here on behalf of a federal investigative office." He glanced at the trauma bay, where Farwell's team was moving with the coordinated urgency of a unit that knows what it's doing. "You need to come with us. Cole isn't stable. Dr. Farwell has him. You've done what you can do." The man's voice wasn't unkind. It was simply factual in the way that people are factual when they've spent years making difficult statements and have learned to stop decorating them. "We've been building something for 8 months. The next 12 hours determine whether it holds. I need you in a room with the right people before anyone in that administrative wing has time to start managing the narrative." Emily looked at the trauma bay. Farwell had the board going, his team moving cleanly, the surgical consult arriving through the door at a jog. Cole was still in the building. That was what mattered. She picked up her bag from the floor where she'd set it. "Where?" The room was on the second floor of the administrative block, which was empty at this hour except for the particular low-level hum of an institution that doesn't fully sleep. Someone had set up a portable table with a laptop, a stack of files, 2 cups of coffee that had been there long enough to be room temperature, and a whiteboard with nothing written on it yet. The other 3 men from the bleachers were already there. They had the focused, slightly compressed quality of a team that has been doing careful work for a long time and can see the finish line from where they're standing. The man with gray temples, he gave his name as Investigator Marcus Webb, which Emily filed without comment, set a file on the table in front of her. It was not her personnel file. It was Cole's. Not the version on Redstone's system. The other version. "We've been investigating a pattern of conduct at this facility for 8 months, Webb said. Intimidation of junior personnel, suppression of formal complaints, manipulation of performance reviews, and a financial arrangement between Cole and 2 senior administrators that involves procurement contracts for training equipment." He paused. "What happened this weekend accelerated our timeline, and what happened tonight—" He glanced at the door toward the direction of the trauma bay. "What happened tonight gives us something we didn't have before." "Witnesses," Emily said. "Witnesses. Dr. Farwell was in that room. 3 members of his team. The junior soldier who came out and made the call saw you working." Webb looked at her with the direct assessment of someone who has been thinking about this specific moment for a while. "And you used a needle decompression in the field, which no civilian nursing certification in this country trains for." Emily didn't say anything. "We pulled your real file 14 months ago," Webb said. "We've known who you are since then. We didn't move because we needed the pattern to be complete and we needed people who were willing to talk." He opened the folder to a specific page. "We have 7 additional staff members who've come forward in the past 48 hours. Apparently something about the weekend made people reconsider their silence." Rosa, Emily thought, and whoever came to Rosa. "What do you need from me?" Emily said. It wasn't really a question. It was the beginning of a negotiation about specifics. A statement, tonight, while everything is still in motion. Your account of the field intervention, your account of the intimidation you experienced post-tournament, and Webb chose the next word carefully. Confirmation that the suspended access card you used to enter this building tonight was not the card you surrendered Monday. Emily was quiet for a moment. "That's a specific thing to confirm." "It is. And the card I surrendered Monday is still in the security desk log as received at 1700 Monday." Webb looked at her steadily. "The card you used tonight will need to be accounted for." This was the part where the careful work of the past 8 months met the specific reality of tonight, and the 2 things didn't align perfectly because they never do. There were going to be edges. There were going to be questions she'd be answering in formal settings for the next several months. She knew that. She'd known it when she picked the card up from the paper bag Tuesday morning. "I need to know," she said, "that the other staff members are protected, the ones who came forward, that this doesn't get managed into something where they carry the consequence and Cole and Briggs walk." "That's why we've been building for 8 months instead of 6, Webb said. Outside the window, the sky over the south side of the base was still showing the glow of the controlled fire, which the base fire crews were working methodically. Someone in the corridor outside the room said something into a radio. A door opened and closed. On the table between Emily and Webb, the file sat open to a page that listed, in the specific dry language of a federal investigation document, 14 incidents across 4 years. 14 times something had happened at Redstone Military Medical Center that should have generated a formal response and hadn't. 14 times a piece of paper had entered a filing system and either not exited or had exited in a form that meant nothing. Emily looked at the list. She recognized 2 of the incidents by their dates alone. She hadn't known the details, but she'd felt the aftermath, the particular quality of a workplace where people have learned to make themselves smaller. You feel it before you understand it. She'd understood it by the end of her first month at Redstone and had been doing the math ever since. "Tell me what the statement needs to cover," she said. Webb reached for the whiteboard marker. They worked until 0600. At 6:12, Dr. Farwell appeared in the doorway. He had surgical gloves still on one hand, which meant he'd come directly. He looked at Emily with an expression that was trying to be professional and wasn't quite managing it. "He's out of OR," Farwell said. "Splenic repair, femurs plated, the burns are secondary. He'll need 2 weeks minimum, but..." He stopped. "He's alive." Emily nodded. Farwell stayed in the doorway. He was a man who had been practicing medicine for 26 years and who had, in that time, developed a reasonable model of what was possible in emergency medicine. His model had been revised in the past 3 hours. He was deciding how to say that. "The field decompression," he said. "He wouldn't have made it to OR without it." "Probably not," Emily said. "Where?" He stopped, started again. "That's not a nursing school skill." "No," Emily said. "It's not." Farwell looked at Webb, then back at Emily. He was reconstructing something. She could see it happening in real time, sorting through 2 years of working alongside her, reassigning the data points to a different framework. "I have a team that just watched you save the life of the man who got you suspended and filed misconduct charges against you," Farwell said slowly. "They're going to want to talk to someone about what they saw." "I know," Emily said, "and I'm going to want to talk to someone about what I saw." He paused. "For the record, formally." Webb from the table. "Dr. Farwell, if you have an hour this morning, I'd like that conversation now." Farwell pulled the remaining surgical glove off, tucked it in his pocket, and came into the room. Outside, the October sky was starting to go gray at the edges, the specific pre-dawn gray that comes before the color returns. That period of time where everything is the same shade and the shapes of things are visible but not their details. The base was going to wake up in the next 90 minutes to a story that was already different from the one they'd gone to sleep with. In the administrative wing, 1 floor down, Deputy Superintendent Colonel Warren Briggs arrived at his office at 0637, which was early for him, called in by the explosion report. He sat down at his desk, opened his email, and found 3 messages he had not expected. One from a federal investigative office, one from the base's legal officer, and one from a name he didn't recognize that had, in the subject line, 8 words that made his hand stop moving on the mouse. "We have been watching Redstone for 8 months. He sat very still for a moment. Then he reached for his phone and dialed Cole's number, which rang to voicemail because Cole was in recovery and would not be receiving calls, and Briggs didn't know that yet. The voicemail connected. Briggs opened his mouth and stopped, because through his office window, visible in the parking lot below, a vehicle with federal plates had just pulled in, and 2 people he did not recognize were walking toward the building's main entrance with the specific, unhurried purposefulness of people who have nowhere else to be and all the time they need. Briggs held the phone to his ear and said nothing into the voicemail for 4 full seconds before ending the call. He set the phone on the desk with the particular deliberateness of a man who is deciding, in real time, what kind of person he is going to be in the next hour. The vehicle in the parking lot was still there. The two people had gone inside the building. He could hear, or thought he could hear, the elevator at the end of the corridor beginning to move. He opened his desk drawer, closed it, opened his email again, and read the message from the Federal Investigative Office a second time, more slowly, the way you read something when the first reading produced results you wanted to dispute. The language was formal and specific. A scheduled interview. This morning. A list of topics that were framed as areas of interest in the way that federal documents frame things they have already documented as areas of interest. His name appeared 4 times in 3 paragraphs. Briggs was 57 years old. He had spent 31 years in military administration, which is a long time to learn how institutions protect themselves. He also knew, because he had spent 31 years watching it happen from various angles, that there is a specific moment in any investigation where the institution's protection stops extending to the individuals inside it. That moment usually looks like a parking lot and 2 people walking toward the entrance. He picked up his phone again and called his personal attorney. Webb's team intercepted Briggs before he reached the stairwell. Not physically. They stepped into the corridor from the room they'd been using, and Webb said his name, and Briggs stopped because that is what people do when someone says their name in a hallway with a specific quality of authority. The exchange that followed was professionally courteous and completely without warmth. Briggs was informed that his scheduled interview had been moved to immediate, that he was not under arrest, that he had the right to have counsel present, and that the federal investigative team had been on site since last weekend and was now in possession of documentation he would probably want to discuss with a lawyer before discussing with anyone else. Briggs said he would need to make a call. Webb said he had 20 minutes. Briggs made 3 calls in 19 minutes. By the time he came into the conference room, something in his posture had changed. Not collapsed, not broken, but recalibrated downward in the way of a man who has called the numbers he thought would help and found that the help was no longer available. Emily was not in the room for that interview. She was down the hall, in a smaller office that someone had unlocked without explanation and where a cup of actual hot coffee had appeared, which she drank while filling out the formal statement Webb had walked her through. The statement was 22 pages when she finished, which surprised her slightly because she'd been trying to be concise. Rosavella arrived at 0730 with 2 other nurses, Philippa Strand, who had been at Redstone 3 years, and Tom Orwick, a male nurse in his 40s who had the particular quality of someone who has been angry about something for a very long time and has recently decided to stop being quiet about it. They had come together, which meant Rosa had called them, which meant something had shifted in the hours since Rosa left Emily's apartment with her empty casserole dish. Emily heard their voices in the corridor and came out. Rosa took one look at her, the same clothes she'd run in, the smoke smell still present, the dried blood on her left sleeve from the pressure work, and said, "How long have you been awake?" "Since the explosion." "That's not what I asked." Emily thought about it. 30 hours, roughly. Rosa looked at Tom, who looked at Philippa, who looked at the ceiling briefly, and then back at Emily. "We're giving statements," Philippa said. "All 3 of us. The investigator said there are 7 others coming in this morning." "I know," Emily said. Tom was quieter than the other 2. He had the hands of someone who'd spent years in physical work before nursing, large and careful, and he was holding a folder that he'd brought from somewhere. "I documented everything," he said. "Every incident, dates, times, what was said, who was present. I've been doing it for 2 years. He paused. "I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I kept doing it." He handed Emily the folder. She opened it, looked at the first page, which listed 11 incidents in Tom's handwriting, specific and dated and cross-referenced to personnel who could be contacted. The handwriting was slightly cramped, the mark of someone writing more than their hand wanted to, but every entry was complete. "You need to give this directly to Webb," Emily said. "Don't let it go through anyone in this building first." Tom nodded. He took the folder back, and there was something in the way he held it after that, more deliberately, with the particular care you give to a thing that has finally become the right shape for its purpose. Emily left the administrative block at 800 because she had been awake for 30 hours and had smoke in her lungs, and her hands still smelled like the mechanical room, and there was nothing more she could do in that building right now that Webb's team couldn't do better without her. She walked back to the contractor housing through the east path, which took her past the edge of the gym parking lot, where the tournament bracket was still visible through the glass of the notice board, her name at the top of the open division column in the same black marker it had always been in. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went inside and slept for 4 hours. She woke to her phone showing 6 missed calls, 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, 1 from Rosa, 1 from the dry cleaning contact, 1 from a 703 area code that she recognized as Northern Virginia, which meant something specific. She called the 703 number first. It rang once. A woman's voice, professional and direct. Assistant Deputy Director Marlene Voss. Is this Carter? Yes. I've been briefed by Webb's team this morning. I'm calling to tell you that your service record is being formally reviewed for declassification at the relevant portions, which we should have completed in 72 hours. A pause that had something in it. Not quite warmth, but the professional equivalent of acknowledgement. What you did in that mechanical room this morning, the field assessment, the intervention, the outcome. That's going to matter for what comes next. Emily was sitting on the edge of her bed with the window showing the motor pool in flat mid-morning light. How much of what comes next is going to involve me sitting in rooms answering the same questions? A fair amount, Voss said. I won't pretend otherwise, but the questions are going to be coming from people on your side of this. That's different from what it looked like 72 hours ago. And the misconduct charges. Being reviewed as of 2 hours ago. Given the source and the timing, I don't expect them to survive the week. A brief pause. Carter, the access card. I know. Webb's handling it on the investigative side, but you're going to be asked directly how you had it. I know that too. Voss was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped the professional register slightly. Not much. Just enough. You didn't have to go back in there. After what that man did to you, the charges, the suspension, you could have stood outside the building and let it happen. Emily looked at the motor pool. A truck was backing out of a bay with the mechanical deliberateness of early morning routine, the driver checking mirrors, the world continuing in its ordinary way despite everything that had happened in the past 6 hours. He needed a needle thoracostomy, Emily said. That's not a character question. Voss made a sound that might have been agreement. 72 hours, she said. Stay reachable. The base spent the rest of Thursday in the particular suspended state that follows a large event before the institutional response has fully organized. People move through their routines with the slightly heightened awareness of a population that knows something has changed but doesn't yet have the full shape of it. The explosion had injured 6 people total, Cole critically, 2 others with moderate injuries who were treated and released, 3 with minor burns and lacerations. The cause was already being categorized as a maintenance failure, which it was, with the additional detail that the failure had been logged and unaddressed for 6 weeks, which made it a maintenance failure with a paper trail. Cole remained in post-surgical recovery, sedated, vitals stable. Farwell had updated the nursing team at morning rounds with the specific brevity of a physician who has more to say than he's currently saying. He'll be here a while, Farwell said. Anyone who needs to reach him is going to have to wait. Nobody asked who specifically might need to reach him. Nobody needed to. At 1400 Thursday, 2 additional vehicles with federal plates arrived at Redstone's main gate and were processed through with an efficiency that suggested someone had called ahead to the right people. By 1600, the administrative wing had the quality of a space that has been quietly taken over. The same furniture, the same lighting, the same institutional beige, but different people moving through it with different purposes. Briggs had not left the building since his interview that morning. His office door was closed. His assistant, Specialist Karen Fuhr, fielded 4 calls from people seeking Briggs and transferred none of them, because Briggs had told her to hold everything, and she had been holding everything with the escalating discomfort of someone who can feel that the instructions she's following are part of a problem she's not going to want to be associated with. At 1545, Specialist Fuhr knocked on Webb's temporary office door and asked if she could speak to someone. She came out 40 minutes later with the particular lightness of a person who has put down something heavy. Emily went back to the administrative block at 1700. She had slept, showered, eaten something she couldn't name afterward, and changed clothes. She looked, from the outside, like a person who had taken a normal break. Her hands had stopped shaking, which was a practical improvement. Webb met her in the corridor. He had the look of someone who has been in a moderate sprint for 12 hours and is managing his pace through discipline rather than energy. Briggs's attorney made contact at noon, Webb said, walking her toward the conference room. They're indicating he's willing to cooperate in exchange for consideration. We're not at terms yet, but the direction is clear. He held the conference room door. There's something you need to hear directly. Inside the room, investigator Diane Cho, the only woman on Webb's 4-person team whom Emily had not spoken with extensively until now, was seated across from a man Emily didn't recognize. He was mid-40s, in civilian clothes, with the particular tension of someone who has made a decision that cannot be unmade and is waiting to find out what that costs. "This is Sergeant First Class David Mercer," Webb said. He was Cole's senior trainer. Mercer looked at Emily. Something crossed his face that wasn't guilt exactly. Guilt had been there earlier, she guessed, and had been processed into something more complicated. "I knew about the charges," he said, "the misconduct filing. I didn't write them, but I saw the draft before they were submitted. Cole asked me to review them." Emily sat down. "I told him the language was too specific," Mercer said, "that it would look constructed. He told me to mind my lane." He exhaled. "I should have—" He stopped. Started differently. There were people who got pushed out of Redstone over the past 4 years. 2 nurses, 1 physician assistant, 1 junior enlisted who tried to file a complaint about training protocols. All of them left on terms that made it look like their choice. He looked at his hands. It wasn't always their choice. Webb from behind Emily. "Sergeant Mercer came in voluntarily this afternoon." Mercer nodded. "After I heard what happened last night? At the building." He glanced at Emily briefly and then back at his hands. "She went in there. After everything. And Cole's alive because of it." A pause. "I've been carrying this for 2 years. I'm done carrying it." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere down the corridor, a printer was running, which was the kind of detail that reality inserts into important moments without asking. "The 2 nurses who left," Emily said. "Do you have names?" "I do." Mercer reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. "I wrote everything down last night, like dates, names, what happened, who was in the room." He put the paper on the table. "Cole isn't the only name on that list." Emily looked at the paper. She didn't touch it. It wasn't hers to touch. It was Webb's. But she read the top line, which had 2 names she didn't know and 1 name she did. Rast. Dr. Philip Rast, Chief of Medical Staff, who had touched his commendation frame in his office and told her to be careful and meant it as a threat while pretending it was concern. Webb reached forward and took the paper. The meeting with Rast happened at 1900, and Emily was not in the room for it, which was the correct decision procedurally and the frustrating one personally. She sat in the small office down the hall and listened to the building's sounds and worked through a second cup of coffee and tried not to reconstruct what was happening through the wall. 38 minutes after the meeting started, Webb came into her office alone and sat down. "He's asking for immunity," Webb said. Emily looked at him. "He says he has documentation. Physical documentation, copies he kept, of instructions he received from Briggs's office over a period of 3 years. Specific instructions about how to handle certain staff members' records." Webb's expression was the carefully neutral face of an investigator who has spent the day being handed things he expected and has just been handed something he didn't. "Including instructions about you. Specifically, dated 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I hadn't entered the tournament yet." "No," Webb said. "But someone had been tracking your personnel file for considerably longer than 4 days. Rast says the instruction when you arrived 2 years ago was to watch you, document any performance irregularities, and report directly to Briggs's office." Emily was very still. "They knew something was in your background," Webb said. "They didn't know what. But Cole apparently had concerns from your first month, something about the way you handled a trauma case that didn't match your listed experience. He flagged it to Briggs. They've been waiting for a reason. The tournament gave them one. It gave them the wrong one, Webb said. They expected to use it quietly. File the charges, move you out, close the file. Instead, he gestured, a small economical gesture that covered everything that had happened since 0347 Thursday morning. Rast wants immunity in exchange for the physical documentation. Emily thought about Rast's commendation frame and the parking lot visible through his window and the specific quality of his voice when he said, "Be careful." A man who had spent years managing the distance between what he knew was wrong and what he was willing to say about it, and who had now calculated that the distance had closed. "What does the documentation prove?" she said. Combined with Mercer's account, Briggs's cooperation, and the 7 staff statements from this morning, Webb laced his fingers on the table. It proves a coordinated pattern, not individual incidents, a system. He looked at her steadily. That's different, legally. That's the difference between this being a workplace misconduct case and being something that ends careers and closes doors permanently. Emily absorbed that. "We're going to need you back in here tomorrow morning," Webb said. "Full debrief, the real one, not the preliminary. That means your actual service record, your actual timeline, everything that wasn't in the file Redstone had." He paused. "I know that's not a small thing to ask." It wasn't. There were reasons that file was sealed, and they weren't all administrative convenience. There were names in her service record that belonged to people who were still operating in places where names and records were a liability. There were operations that had technically not happened in the specific legal fiction that national security produces. Opening that record, even partially, even in a controlled federal investigative context, was a door you went through once and didn't come back through. She knew that when she picked up the access card from the paper bag. She'd known it, honestly, when she submitted the tournament entry form. "What time?" she said. 800. She stood. "I'll be here." She was at the door when Webb said, "Carter." She turned. He had the careful expression of a man who is about to say something outside his professional register. 14 complaints suppressed over 4 years. That's 14 people who went through what you went through and didn't have what you have. The outcome for them was different. A pause. "What you did last night and what you did today, both of those things matter for what those 14 people get out of this. I want you to know that." Emily looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. She walked out of the administrative block into the October dark, the temperature having dropped while she'd been inside into the specific cold that Montana produces after sundown without apology. The parking lot still had the federal vehicles in it, one more than this morning. The gym notice board was visible from here, the bracket sheets now dark behind the glass. She walked back toward the contractor housing, her breath visible, the base quiet around her in the way of a place that is outwardly the same and inwardly different, the way places are when something underneath them has shifted. In OR recovery on the 3rd floor, Cole's monitors maintained their rhythms. He would be conscious in the morning. The sedation protocol ran through approximately 0500, which the night nurse had documented in the chart at 1930, and which meant that by the time Emily walked into Webb's 0800 meeting, the man whose life she had preserved would be awake in a hospital bed, oriented enough to understand his situation, and someone from the legal office would be sitting in a chair by his door. Not because Cole was under arrest, not yet, but because the paper that Tom Orwick had spent 2 years writing in cramped handwriting, and the documentation Rast had pulled from wherever he'd stored it, and the names on Mercer's folded piece of paper, and the 7 statements and the 14 incidents, and the 4 years of the specific kind of institutional silence that requires active maintenance, all of that was now in a room on the 2nd floor of a building Cole had spent a decade treating as his own, in the hands of people who had been watching since before the tournament started, and by morning they were going to have enough. And somewhere in that building, in an office with a commendation frame on the wall, Philip Rast was sitting with a federal investigator and saying out loud, for the first time, everything he'd spent 3 years helping to hide. The door to the contractor housing closed behind Emily. The Montana dark settled over Redstone Military Medical Center, and in Cole's room on the 3rd floor, at 2203, his phone, which had been placed in a personal effects bag by a night nurse following standard post-surgical protocol, showed a screen light through the plastic of the bag, brief and then dark, as a text message arrived from Briggs's number that would, by morning, be the last piece of evidence Webb needed, sent by a man who did not yet know that his phone records had been subpoenaed 4 hours ago. The text message from Briggs's phone read 11 words. Don't talk to anyone. Lawyer only. I'll handle the rest. It was time-stamped 2203. Cole's phone received it through the plastic of the personal effects bag, screen lighting briefly in the dark of the recovery room where the night nurse had documented its placement at 1930 per standard post-surgical protocol. The nurse on the 2200 check noted the screen light, noted the bag's position, noted nothing unusual because there was nothing unusual to note. She didn't open the bag. That wasn't her job. What happened to that text message next was the result of a subpoena that had been filed at 1800 that evening and processed through the carrier's legal response team with the specific efficiency that Federal Investigative Authority produces when it has been building toward a moment for 8 months. By 0600 Friday morning, Webb had the message in printed form, time-stamped, carrier verified, sitting on top of a file that was now thick enough to require a binder clip on each side. He read it twice. Then he put it in a specific section of the file and went to get coffee. Jotham. Emily was at the administrative block at 7:49. She had slept 6 hours, which was not enough and was what was available. She'd run her 5 miles at 5:30, not because she particularly wanted to, but because the alternative was lying in bed recounting the last 48 hours in a loop, and running was more productive than that. The base at dawn had the specific quality of a place that is trying to proceed normally and is not quite succeeding. People going through their routines with a slightly heightened attention. The way people move when they know something has changed in their environment but haven't been told officially what. Webb was already in the conference room with Investigator Cho and a third person Emily hadn't seen before, a woman in her late 40s, in a suit that was not military but was not quite civilian either, with a lanyard that she wore tucked under her jacket rather than over it. She had a laptop open and a recorder on the table and introduced herself as Senior Legal Counsel Adrienne Park, attached to the Federal Investigative Office. "We're going to do this formally," Webb said, sitting down. "Recorded, for the record. Ms. Carter, you have the right to have your own counsel present. If you want to pause and make that arrangement, I'm fine," Emily said. Park looked at her over the laptop. "This is going to take a few hours? The full timeline, the full service record, everything. Some of what you tell us today is going to be part of the evidentiary record in proceedings that will be public. You understand that?" "Yes." "And you're prepared to speak to your actual background, not the contracted file." Emily sat down. The chair was the same uncomfortable conference room chair it had been yesterday. The coffee was slightly better, which suggested someone had made a second run. "Yes," she said. "I'm prepared." Park nodded and adjusted the recorder. "Then let's start at the beginning." Chit. The beginning, in this context, was 11 years ago. Emily Carter had enlisted at 19, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the sequence of events that followed. An aptitude evaluation at basic that flagged specific combination scores, a quiet conversation with a recruiter whose rank insignia was not visible, a second evaluation that was conducted in a room with no windows and no nameplate on the door. She'd been assigned to a standard medical training track on paper, and to a considerably less standard training program in practice, one that operated under a unit designation that appeared in certain budget documents under an allocation code and nowhere else. She'd spent 7 years in that capacity. 3 deployments, none of which appeared in any document that would survive a standard background check. The skills she'd accumulated in those 7 years were the skills of someone who had provided medical care in environments where the nearest surgical facility was a 4-hour helicopter flight away on a good day and an abstraction on a bad one. She had performed procedures that most physicians with 10 years of hospital experience had not performed. She had done it in conditions that she described in the debrief, without drama, in the specific compressed language of someone reporting operational facts. Park typed steadily. Webb asked occasional questions, precise and targeted, the kind that filled specific gaps rather than requested the narrative to restart. Cho managed the recorder and said almost nothing, which Emily recognized as a deliberate division of labor. At the 2-hour mark, Park looked up from the laptop. The sealed record. The classification on the specific operations. We can declassify the relevant portions for evidentiary purposes, but there are names in your file that will need to stay protected. People currently operational. I know which names. We'll need you to identify them before we pull the record, so we know what we're redacting. Emily listed 4 names. She did it without hesitation, which told Park something about the quality of her memory and also something about the quality of her loyalty to the people those names belong to. One more thing, Webb said. He opened the binder to a specific page and pushed it across the table. It was the misconduct filing, Cole's document, the 2 pages with Briggs as co-signatory. This is going to be formally withdrawn today. I want you to see it. Emily looked at the page. She'd read it before, obviously. She knew every line of it. But looking at it now in this room, with the recorder running and Park's laptop open and the 8-month investigation sitting in a binder on the table, it had a different quality. It looked like what it was, a document built from nothing, assembled by people who had mistaken the absence of visible record for the absence of capability. Okay, she said. It doesn't get unfiled retroactively, Webb said. The record will show it was filed and subsequently withdrawn pending investigation. That's the honest record. That's fine. Webb pulled the page back. The preliminary recommendation for complete reinstatement of your hospital privileges came through at 05:45 this morning from Voss's office. That's administrative, not our lane, but I wanted you to know. Emily drank her coffee. It was genuinely better than yesterday's. Cole was conscious by 05:30, as the sedation protocol had projected. The night nurse documented his return to orientation at 05:37, name, date, location, oriented ×3, and noted the legal office representative present in the chair by the door, who had been there since 0500 and had not introduced herself but had shown credentials to the charge nurse, which was sufficient. Cole had looked at the woman in the chair and then looked at the ceiling and not said anything for a while. At 0900, with his attending physician present and his personal attorney on speaker from somewhere in Ashford, the legal office representative placed a printed document on Cole's tray table. His attorney advised him not to touch it until he'd heard its contents read aloud, which the representative did in a level voice, beginning with Cole's name and rank and proceeding through a list of formal allegations that took 4 minutes to read in full. Cole listened with the particular stillness of a man who has received information he prepared himself for and found that preparation was insufficient. When it was finished, his attorney said something through the speaker in a voice too low to carry, and Cole said audibly, "How much of it is documented?" The legal office representative said, "The current evidentiary package includes physical documentation, digital records, carrier-verified communications, and statements from 11 witnesses across 4 years of activity." Cole closed his eyes. His attorney said, in the too low voice, something that was probably say nothing. Cole said nothing. Emily came out of the debrief at 11:30 with the specific wrung-out quality of someone who has spent 3.5 hours handing over things they've been carrying for a while. Not bad, exactly. Just lighter in a way that required adjustment. Farwell intercepted her in the corridor outside the administrative wing, which told her he'd been watching for her to come out. "Walk with me," he said. They walked to the end of the corridor where a window looked out over the east side of the base, the motor pool in the distance, the flat Montana autumn beyond the fence line. Farwell was a man who organized his thoughts through physical movement. She'd noticed this in their 2 shared shifts, the way he processed clinical situations by walking the ward rather than sitting at the station. "I spoke to Voss's office this morning," he said. "On my own initiative, not because anyone asked me to." Emily waited. "I told them what I saw in that trauma bay Thursday morning, not in terms of the investigation, in terms of the medicine." He turned to look at her. He had the slightly roughened quality of someone on their 2nd straight day of reduced sleep, which she recognized because she was carrying it herself. "I've been a physician for 26 years. I've worked with trauma nurses in 3 different hospitals, 2 of them level 1. What you did in that mechanical room, the assessment, the decision to decompress, the technique itself, that's not a skill set that exists on your personnel file." "No," Emily said. And the field diagnosis, the splenic call. You were right, by the way. Or confirmed spleen at 40 minutes into the procedure. She'd known. Not with certainty, but the clinical picture had been clear enough. I told Voss's office, Farwell said, that if they're looking at what happens next for you professionally, they should understand what they have, not just in terms of the investigation, in terms of what you can do. He paused. I also told them that this hospital lost something when it suspended you, and that losing it was a decision made by people who didn't know what they were deciding about. Emily looked at the motor pool. I should have pushed back harder when Rast called me in September, Farwell said. He said it in the specific voice of a man stating a fact about himself rather than seeking absolution for it. He framed it as a peer conversation, informal, told me there were concerns about the tournament entry, that I might want to have a word with you. I didn't push back. I told myself it wasn't my lane. It wasn't your lane, Emily said. No, but the right thing and my lane aren't always the same thing. I know that. He exhaled. I just wanted to say it out loud, to you, once. She looked at him. He wasn't asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not even acknowledgement. He was doing what Tom Orwick had done with his folder and what Mercer had done with his folded piece of paper, putting something down that he'd been holding, in the right place, at the right time. I appreciate it, she said, and she meant it, which was what made her say it in the first place. Tom. The press arrived at Redstone's main gate at 1400 Friday, which was both earlier and later than expected, earlier than the administrative wing had prepared for, later than the investigative team had anticipated they'd be able to contain information. A base spokesman who had been given talking points at noon was using them with the stiff delivery of someone reading from a script they received 30 minutes ago, and the reporters at the gate were asking questions that indicated they had considerably more than the talking points suggested they should. Someone had talked to the press, which surprised nobody who had been in the building for the past 18 hours. Webb was on the phone with Voss's office when the first news alert hit the wire services. He saw it on Cho's laptop screen, a regional outlet leading with federal investigation at Redstone Military Medical Center, multiple officials named, and absorbed this information without visible reaction, which was a professional skill he'd spent years developing. It's out, he said to the room. Cho was already on her phone. The third investigator, whose name Emily had learned was Specialist Terrence Duff, which struck her as an unlikely investigator's name, but reality doesn't curate itself, was pulling up the article. The article was accurate in its broad strokes, and specific in exactly the ways that suggested the source had access to the investigation's framework without having the full file. Webb read it in 90 seconds and identified, from the details, that whoever had talked was someone with general knowledge of the structure, but not the specific evidence. A peripheral contact, not a core source. He filed this assessment away and kept moving because the investigation didn't pause for press coverage. At 1500, Briggs's attorney submitted a formal cooperation agreement, which meant the terms that had been left unresolved yesterday had been resolved. And what that meant practically was that Briggs was now actively providing information rather than managing his exposure. This was the point at which investigations of this type typically accelerated, and it did. 3 additional names appeared in the evidentiary record by 1700 that had not been there at 0800. 2 of them in the procurement chain that connected Cole's training equipment contracts to a vendor whose principal was a former colleague of Briggs from an earlier posting, and 1 of them in the base's legal office, which explained certain documents that had entered filing systems and exited in unhelpful forms. The name in the legal office was Captain Gerald Foss, who was at his desk at 1645 when 2 people he'd never met came through his door and showed him credentials, and whose expression, according to Cho's notes from the follow-up interview, suggested he'd been expecting something like this for considerably longer than the past 48 hours. Emily spent Friday afternoon in the contractor housing, which felt like the right location given that the administrative block had become a controlled environment and her presence there was no longer immediately necessary. She cleaned the apartment, which took 20 minutes and was less about cleanliness than having something to do with her hands. She ate a proper meal for the first time since Wednesday, which her body registered with the specific insistence of a system that has been running on coffee and adrenaline and has reached its limit of tolerance. Rosa called at 16:30. "Turn on the news," Rosa said without preamble. "I know what's on the news." The regional channel has Cole's name and Briggs's name. They have the tournament. They have a pause. "Emily, they have a source saying a suspended nurse saved Cole's life. They don't have your name yet, but they have enough that anyone on this base is going to know in about 20 minutes. Emily looked at the wall. "Are you okay?" Rosa said. "I need to make a call," Emily said. She called the dry cleaning number. It rang 3 times. A voice she recognized from earlier communications, not Hale, someone further down the chain. "We're aware of the press situation. Webb's office is managing it. Your name stays out of the public record as long as possible." "How long is possible?" 24 hours, probably. The investigation is moving toward formal charges in the next day or two, and the evidentiary record becomes partially public at that point. Your field intervention is in the record. Emily sat with that. "Your call," the voice said. "If you want to get ahead of it, Voss's office can facilitate. If you want to stay behind it, Webb's team will do their best. But you should decide now." She thought about the 14 incidents, the 2 nurses who had left on terms that weren't their choice. The documents in Tom Orwick's folder, 2 years of cramped handwriting in a manila folder that he'd held more carefully after she told him where to take it. The 3 people who had come to Rosa separately in the same week. "Tell Voss I'll take the press call," Emily said. "On my terms. Prepared statement. No live questions until the investigation closes." "Understood." A pause. "That's the right call." She ended the call and looked at the window, the motor pool in the late afternoon light. The base was settling into its evening patterns, but the patterns had a different quality now. Not the quality of a place that has processed a shock, but the quality of a place that is beginning to understand the shape of what's coming. Saturday arrived cold. The overnight temperature had dropped into the low 20s, and the base woke to frost on the vehicles and the particular sound-dampening quality of dry, cold air, the base's ambient noise slightly different from usual. Fewer voices, more deliberate movement, the specific hush of a community that is listening. At 800, formal charges were filed against Ethan Cole in absentia. He was still in the hospital bed, his attorney now physically present rather than on speaker, encompassing conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority, falsification of official documents, and conspiracy to suppress official complaints. This last charge carrying the weight of the 4-year pattern that Mercer's account and Rast's documentation and Briggs's cooperation had made provable. Cole's attorney was given 40 minutes with him before the legal office representative returned. What was said in those 40 minutes was not recorded. What emerged from them was Cole's face, which the nurse doing his 0930 vital check described afterward, to Rosa, who described it afterward to Emily, as looking like a man who had been told something he knew was coming and had spent a year telling himself wouldn't arrive. Briggs was formally charged at 0845 in the conference room that had been Webb's base of operations, with Park reading the charges and Briggs sitting with his attorney beside him and his hands on the table. Not folded, just flat, the way hands look when the body has stopped having opinions about posture. The charges against Briggs were more numerous than Cole's and included the procurement fraud, which carried federal criminal exposure beyond the military administrative proceedings, a detail that had been in the cooperation agreement's terms and that Briggs had understood when he signed it, which meant he'd accepted a worse outcome for himself in exchange for something, and that something was presumably the specific charges being left off the list that would have been worse. The name he'd traded was the procurement vendor, whose name was now in a separate investigation by a separate federal office that had been contacted by Voss's team Thursday evening and had not needed significant persuasion to open a file. Rast's immunity arrangement was finalized at 0930. He came out of the legal office with his attorney and walked to his car in the parking lot with the quality of a man who has survived something by agreeing to never be the same on the other side of it. He sat in his car for a few minutes before starting it. He drove away from Redstone Military Medical Center in the flat Saturday morning light and did not come back. Captain Gerald Foss, the legal office name from Briggs's cooperation, was placed on administrative hold at 1000, pending a separate proceeding that Webb's team passed to the base's Inspector General's office. He was not charged Friday. The evidence chain on his involvement was sound but required additional processing. But his access to certain systems was suspended, which meant that the specific function he had served in the machinery of the past 4 years, the function of making documents enter systems and exit in unhelpful forms, was no longer operational. Emily received the formal reinstatement of her hospital privileges at 1100 Saturday morning. It came as a paper document signed by the acting chief of medical staff. Farwell, who had been asked to serve in that capacity on an interim basis, and had agreed with the specific reluctance of someone who has too much to do already but understands that the alternative is a worse candidate, and countersigned by the base's commanding officer, who had been largely invisible throughout the past 48 hours, but whose signature was required on documents of this type. Webb delivered it in person. He knocked on her door at the contractor housing and handed it to her without ceremony, which she appreciated. The misconduct filing is formally withdrawn as of 10:45. The record shows the withdrawal and the reason. He looked at her. The reason cited is complaint found unsupported upon investigation and subsequently determined to have been filed in bad faith. That language is going to be in the permanent record. Emily read the reinstatement document. Her name, her title, her privileges restored, the date. "There's one more thing," Webb said. He had the expression of a man who is about to deliver something he has been carrying carefully. "Your actual service record. The declassification process is running faster than the 72 hours Voss estimated. We're looking at end-of-day Monday for the relevant portions. When that happens," he paused, "it becomes part of the record here. People in this building are going to know who you were before Redstone." "I know," Emily said. "How do you feel about that?" It was an unusual question from Webb, who had maintained his professional register throughout with considerable discipline. Emily recognized it as genuine and considered it accordingly. "Complicated," she said, which was the honest answer. "That seems right," he said. He left. She stood in the doorway of the contractor housing with the reinstatement document in her hand, the cold Saturday air coming in, the frost still visible on the vehicles in the motor pool in the shadow of the buildings where the sun hadn't reached. The town's awareness of Redstone's situation had been building since Friday's first news alert, and by Saturday afternoon it had reached the specific pitch of a community that is processing something significant about an institution it lives adjacent to. The base had always been Ashford's primary economic reality. The hospital, the contracts, the payroll, and the news that multiple senior officials were under federal investigation carried a particular weight in a town where most families had someone who worked there or had worked there. The base's public affairs office issued a statement at 1400 that confirmed the investigation, confirmed the cooperation with federal authorities, and used the phrase commitment to accountability and transparency 3 times in 4 paragraphs, which was 2 times more than it appeared in any document the public affairs officer had actually read before drafting the statement. By 1600, social media had done the work that social media does, which is to take verified information and surround it with context that ranges from accurate to invented and distribute the whole package at the same speed. Emily's name was in 3 posts by 1600, 2 of them accurately identifying her role in Cole's survival, one of them claiming she was a former CIA operative, which was wrong in its specifics, but indicated that the question of her background was now a public question. She called Voss's office at 1630. "It's Carter. The prepared statement. Let's move it to tomorrow morning." Voss herself came on the line, which Emily noted. "You sure? Once your name is out there officially." "It's already out there. I'd rather it come from me than from someone else's guess." She looked at the window. The afternoon light was long and low, October's particular quality of fading, the kind of light that makes everything look both clear and temporary. "I want to say something about the other staff members, the 14 incidents, the people who left. That's going to be part of the public record when the charges are filed." "I know, but I want to say it first, not as a legal document, as—" She paused, finding the word. "As a person." Voss was quiet for a moment. "I'll have Park set it up. Sunday morning, 0900. We'll have someone review the statement before it goes out." "That's fine." After she ended the call, she sat at the small kitchen table where the suspension notice had been 2 days ago and opened a new document on her laptop and began writing. Not the prepared statement that would come from the notes, from the structure, from the evidentiary framework. What she wrote now was the draft that she would revise into the statement, the one that said what she actually meant before the legal review took out the parts that were too personal or too specific. She wrote for an hour and a half. She wrote about 14 incidents and the specific cost of institutional silence. She wrote about the 2 nurses who had left on terms that weren't their choice. She wrote about Tom Orwick's folder and 2 years of cramped handwriting. She did not write any of those things in those terms. She wrote around them in the way you write when you're finding the version that's true without being private in ways that would harm the people it describes. When she finished, she read it through once. It was not perfect. It had places that ran too long and a section in the middle that was doing 2 things at once and needed to be simplified. She marked those places with brackets and set the document aside for the morning. Then she made dinner. Actual dinner, the same meal she'd made on the first evening she arrived at Redstone 2 years ago, which was pasta with what was available, because she'd unpacked her kitchen gear before anything else, because that was the kind of person she was, and sat at the table and ate it while the bass went quiet outside the window. The evening settling over Ashford, Montana, in the ordinary way of places that continue regardless. Her phone showed a message from the 703 number, not Voss, a different extension. It said only, "Service record declassification approved at relevant portions, Monday 800. And then, below that, a second line that had been added as a separate send, a few minutes after the first, "Well done, Carter." She read that second line twice. Then she put the phone face down on the table and finished her dinner. Outside, in the administrative block, Webb was working late, which was something he apparently did without particular awareness of doing it. Cho had gone back to her hotel at 1900, Duff at 2000, and Webb was still at the portable table with the binder and the laptop, cross-referencing the procurement chain documentation against Briggs's timeline, when his phone lit up with a call from a number he recognized as the base commanding officer's direct line. He answered. "Investigator Webb," said Colonel Patricia Maddox, who had been the commanding officer of Redstone for 18 months, and who had been, in Webb's professional assessment, neither part of the problem nor part of the solution until approximately Thursday morning, when she had contacted his team directly and offered full administrative cooperation. "I have something you need to know." Webb reached for a pen. "I've been reviewing the personnel files of the staff members cited in the complaint documentation," Maddox said. "The 14 incidents. I've been going through the original filings, not the versions on the hospital system. The physical originals, from the archives, which nobody pulled because nobody asked for them." A pause. "Someone went through those physical files. I can't tell you when, but there are pages missing from 4 of the 14 cases. Removed, not misfiled. The holes in the binder rings are there. The pages aren't." Webb was very still. "The missing pages," Maddox said. "Based on what's present in each file, they would have been the pages containing witness signatures, the corroborating signatures from the original complaints." Another pause. "Without those pages, 4 of your 14 cases go from documented to he said, she said." Webb looked at the binder in front of him. "When did you find this?" 40 minutes ago." "Which 4 cases?" Maddox read the numbers. Webb checked them against the binder. His face did nothing while he did this. Then he said, "The cases that went to formal internal review, the 4 that got furthest through the system before they were dismissed." "Yes." "Which means someone removed those pages after the reviews were closed, when the files went to archive." Webb set the pen down. "Because if the files had been complete when they went to archive, someone would have flagged the discrepancy during the review." "That's my reading," Maddox said. "Yes." Webb was quiet for a moment. Voss, he thought, the legal office, the man whose function had been to make documents enter systems and exit in unhelpful forms, who had been placed on administrative hold but not yet charged, who had, as of Saturday morning, been cooperating in the preliminary interview in the specific way of someone who is answering the questions being asked and carefully not mentioning the questions that aren't being asked. "Colonel Maddox," Webb said, "I need you to secure those 4 physical files in your personal possession immediately." Don't put them back. Don't give them to anyone. Don't log them out. Keep them until I can send someone for them. Already done, Maddox said. And the archive room? Locked. I have the key. Webb picked up his phone and sent a message to Duff, who would not appreciate being reached at 2115 but would understand why. Then he sent a message to Park. Then he pulled the binder open to the section on Foss and found the preliminary interview notes and read them with the specific attention of someone who is now looking for a different shape in a document they've already read. He found it in the third page. A single line in Cho's notes, flagged with a small asterisk that Cho used when something was unresolved. Subject stated he processed files as received. Pressed on definition of as received, subject declined to clarify. Move to follow-up. Follow-up had been scheduled for Monday. Webb looked at the line for a moment, then he called Cho's hotel. She answered on the second ring, awake, which told him she'd been working too. The 4 archive files, he said. Maddox just found missing pages. Witness signature pages. A short silence. Foss? Foss. Webb closed the binder. I need you here at 700 tomorrow. We're moving his interview to morning. Another short silence. Then Cho said, He's been holding something back. Yes, Webb said. You think he knows where the pages went. I think, Webb said carefully, that a man who processed files as received for 4 years in a legal office has a specific definition of that phrase that he's been waiting for someone to ask about directly. He paused. And I think that when we ask it directly, we're going to find out that someone above Foss gave him instructions that he followed and then kept documentation of. Because that's what careful people do when they're given instructions they know are wrong. The line was quiet for a moment. If there's documentation of the instruction, Cho said slowly, then Foss didn't just process files, he's the chain of evidence for who ordered the pages removed. Yes, Webb said. Outside the administrative block's second-floor window, Ashford was dark and cold, the base settling into Saturday night with the ordinary sounds of an institution continuing its rhythms. In the hospital 3 buildings over, Cole's monitors ran their steady data. In the contractor housing, Emily Carter's kitchen light was on, visible from a certain angle through the window, the motor pool between. And in the archive room in the base's records building, 4 personnel files sat in a locked cabinet, their binder rings holding the ghosts of pages that had been there once and weren't anymore, and the person who had put them there, the person who had received the instruction and followed it, and then, being a careful person, had written the instruction down somewhere and kept it, was in his quarters on the east side of the base, not sleeping, waiting for Monday's interview with the specific quality of someone who has decided and not yet announced what they're going to say when the right question is finally asked. Foss didn't wait for Monday. He came in Sunday at 06:30, before Cho arrived, before Webb had finished his first coffee. He knocked on the conference room door and stood in the frame with a manila envelope in both hands and the look of a man who has been awake for most of the night, working up to a specific moment and has finally arrived at it. Webb looked at him. Captain Foss. I need to talk to someone before the OH700 interview, Foss said, before the formal record opens. Webb set his coffee down. Come in. Foss sat. He put the envelope on the table but kept his hands on it, which was the body language of someone who has carried something for a long time and hasn't fully decided to let it go, even though they've already decided. He was 44 years old and had the specific exhaustion of someone who has been maintaining a position through will rather than comfort. The 4 files, Foss said. Maddox called me last night. She shouldn't have done that, Webb said. She didn't tell me anything. She just said the archive room was locked and I should be prepared for an early conversation this morning. Foss looked at the envelope. She didn't have to say more than that. Webb waited. I received written instruction in March 2 years ago to remove specific pages from 4 personnel files before they went to long-term archive. The instruction came from Briggs's office. It was signed by Briggs. Foss pushed the envelope across the table. I kept a copy of the instruction. I kept copies of the pages I removed. I've had them in a lockbox in my quarters since March 2 years ago. Webb looked at the envelope without touching it yet. Why? He said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Foss thought about it for a moment. Because I knew that following the instruction was wrong. And I knew I was going to follow it anyway, because I'd been following instructions from that office for 2 years and I'd told myself each time it was the last time. His voice was steady, in the way that voices are when the emotion has been processed somewhere else already, earlier, alone. But I wasn't going to do it without keeping a record, because I needed to know there was a version of this where what happened could be proven. Webb opened the envelope. Inside, one page, Briggs's signature, the instruction exactly as Foss had described, and beneath it, 4 sets of pages. The witness signatures, the corroborating evidence from the original complaints, the pieces that had made 4 cases provable and whose absence had made them dismissible. Webb read the instruction page twice. Then he looked up. "You've been sitting on this for 2 years." "Yes." "Why now?" Foss looked at the window where the Sunday morning light was beginning to come through flat and cold. "Because of what she did Thursday morning," he said. "Carter. Going into that building." He paused. "I've been telling myself for 2 years that I was protecting myself, keeping the evidence in case I needed it. But there's a difference between keeping evidence for yourself and being willing to use it for someone else." He exhaled. "She saved a man who tried to destroy her. I watched that happen, and I thought, I don't want to be the person who had the thing that mattered and held on to it because the timing was convenient." The room was quiet. "Captain Foss," Webb said, "I'm going to need you to walk me through every instruction you received from Briggs's office, everything you followed and everything you kept, starting from the beginning." Foss nodded. "This is going to take most of the day." "I know," Foss said. "I've got time." The formal charges against Briggs were amended Sunday afternoon to include destruction of official records and obstruction, which elevated the federal criminal exposure significantly beyond what his cooperation agreement had anticipated. His attorney spent 90 minutes on the phone with Park trying to renegotiate terms. The renegotiation was not successful. Cole's attorney, separately, entered a formal response to the charges that was notable primarily for what it didn't contest. 4 of the 7 allegations were met with no objection, which in legal language means the attorney has done the math and found the math unfavorable. The remaining 3 were contested on procedural grounds that Park described to Webb as holding pattern language, the kind of response that buys time rather than argues position. The 2 names from the procurement chain, the vendor and his former colleague, were formally notified of the parallel investigation by Federal Financial Crimes Office at 1600 Sunday. By 1730, both had retained attorneys and both attorneys had called the same number, which was the number of a lawyer in Billings who specialized in federal white-collar defense and who was going to have a very full Monday. By Sunday evening, the public record of charges was posted on the Federal Investigative Office's public document portal, as required by procedure. It was a 47-page document in the specific dry language of federal proceedings, and most people who read about it on Monday morning read a summary written by a reporter who had read the whole thing so they didn't have to. The summary was accurate and contained Emily Carter's name in the 6th paragraph, attributed to her role in the field intervention and her subsequent cooperation with the investigation. The summary did not contain her service record, which was not yet declassified. It described her as a contracted nurse at Redstone Medical Center with an unspecified prior military medical background, which was technically accurate and impressively incomplete. Emily's prepared statement went out at 9 a.m., Sunday through Voss's office communication channel, which distributed it to the same outlets that had been covering the investigation. She had worked on it until 100 Saturday night and revised it Sunday morning with the Legal Review Edits Incorporated, which had removed 2 sentences and softened 1 phrase and otherwise left it intact, which she took as a sign that the legal team had been either satisfied or overworked. The statement was 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph named no one and described nothing specific. It said that she had worked at Redstone Medical Center for 2 years, that she had observed and experienced conduct that did not meet the standards any medical institution should maintain, and that she had cooperated fully with the federal investigation. The second paragraph was about the other staff members. She described, without naming them, 14 incidents across 4 years involving personnel who had raised concerns through proper channels and whose concerns had been suppressed. She said that the courage it required to document something you know will be used against you and to maintain that documentation for years without knowing if it would ever matter was not a small thing. She said that Tom Orwick's 2 years of handwritten notes in a folder that he brought to the right room at the right time was the kind of quiet, persistent integrity that rarely gets recognition and deserved it. The third paragraph was the one that had taken the longest to write. It was about Cole. She did not characterize him as a villain, which surprised some people who read it and made sense to those who thought about it. She said that a man who had used his authority to harm people had also needed emergency medical care, and that providing that care was not complicated. She said that the decision to go into the building was not about him. It was about what she'd been trained to do, what she believed medical care meant, and the fact that those things don't have exceptions. She said this not to be gracious, but because it was true, and because the distinction mattered to her. The fourth paragraph was personal in a way the legal review had flagged, and she'd kept anyway. She wrote that institutions fail people in patterns, not accidents, that the mechanism of suppression she had witnessed at Redstone required multiple people to make the choice, repeatedly, to prioritize their own comfort over someone else's reality. That the most dangerous thing about that mechanism was not its dramatic moments, but its ordinary ones. The conversation that didn't happen, the form that went into a file and didn't come out. The person who said this isn't my lane and moved on. She wrote that the people who had spoken up, finally, had done so at real cost to themselves, and that the measure of an institution is not what it does when things are going well, but what it does when someone stands up and says this is wrong. She ended with one sentence that was not tactical or legal or procedurally relevant. It said, "The woman everyone called just a nurse was never just anything, and neither are you." The statement was shared 700 times in the first 2 hours, which was not a number Emily tracked. She was on her morning run. Monday arrived with the specific clarity of a day that has work to do. The declassification of Emily's service record at the relevant portions was completed at 0800 as projected, and the relevant portions were her unit designation, her deployment history, her qualifications and certifications, and the specific operations she had participated in that had generated the medical competencies that Farwell had witnessed in the trauma bay. The name she had identified remained redacted. Everything else was now documentable. Webb called her at 0815. "The record's clear," he said. "It's in the formal evidentiary file. Farwell's been sent a copy per his request as acting chief of medical staff." "Okay," Emily said. "There's going to be a formal proceeding for the charges, probably 4 to 6 months to complete. You'll be called to testify." "I know. And there's a thing this afternoon that Maddox is organizing, a formal acknowledgement, her language, for staff involved in the investigation and in the—" He paused, finding the right category. "The events of Thursday morning. You don't have to attend, but it's there." Emily thought about it. "What time?" 1400, hospital main conference room. "I'll be there." She was there at 1352, which was the kind of early that is not quite punctual but communicates intent. The main conference room held 40 people when it was set for a meeting, and by 1400 it had 43, which required 3 chairs brought in from the corridor. Colonel Maddox stood at the front with the erect posture of someone who has been in uniform for 24 years and has internalized it. Farwell was in the second row. Rosa was near the back with Tom Orwick and Philippa Strand. Webb's team stood along one wall, not participating, present. Maddox spoke for 8 minutes. She was direct and specific in the way that people are when they've decided to say the true thing without the institutional padding around it. She named the investigation explicitly. She named the charges and the people charged. She said that Redstone Military Medical Center had failed in its obligations to the people who worked there, that this failure had been systemic and had been enabled by the silence of people who knew and the decisions of people who acted, and that both of those things were going to be addressed in the proceedings ahead. Then she said Emily's name. She described what had happened Thursday morning in the mechanical room, the field assessment, the intervention, the outcome, in clinical terms that were nonetheless not cold because the facts themselves were not cold. She said that Emily had entered a burning building, suspended and formally charged, to provide emergency care to the man who had filed those charges. She said that this was not a small thing, and she was not going to characterize it as though it were. She said that effective immediately, the misconduct filing was formally stricken from Emily's personnel record. Not withdrawn, not noted as withdrawn, but removed, as it should never have been filed. She said that Emily's nursing privileges were fully restored with all seniority and standing intact. She said that the access card question, which she acknowledged carefully without specifics, was being handled at the federal investigative level and would not result in administrative action against Emily. Then she looked directly at Emily in the second row and said, "On behalf of this institution, I apologize. That's not a procedural statement. I mean it." The room was quiet in the specific way of a room where 43 people are processing something at the same time, and none of them are sure what the right response is. Emily nodded. Once. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't completion. It was acknowledgement received, which is a different and more honest thing. Cole's formal discharge from the hospital happened Wednesday. He came out in a wheelchair. The femur repair required it for another 3 weeks. The attending had been specific. With his attorney beside him, and a legal hold notice served at the discharge desk, meaning he was not to leave the state pending proceedings. His face had the particular quality of a man who has been lying in a hospital bed for 6 days with nothing to do but think. Emily was at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor when he came through. She was there because she was working, first shift back, as of Tuesday, Farwell having cleared her return with the specific efficiency of a man who has too many staffing gaps and is relieved to resolve one. She was charting a medication record when the wheelchair passed the station and Cole looked up. He looked at her for a moment. She looked at him. He said, "Carter." She said, "Sergeant Cole." He opened his mouth and then closed it, which was not like him, or not like the version of him she'd known before Thursday morning. His attorney put a hand on the wheelchair handle, gently, with the body language of someone who has spent 6 days advising his client not to say things and is not done yet. Cole looked away. The wheelchair moved toward the elevator. Emily went back to the medication chart. She didn't know what she'd wanted him to say. She wasn't sure she'd wanted him to say anything. There are things that words don't reach, and the particular accounting between them was one of those things. Too specific, too weighted with what had happened in a burning building at 0347 on a Thursday morning, to be addressed in a hallway by a man in a wheelchair with his lawyer's hand on the handle. What mattered was the legal record. What mattered was the 14 incidents being formally reviewed, the suppressed complaints reopened, the names in Foss's copied pages having their cases reconstructed with the missing evidence restored. What mattered was that the 2 nurses who had left on terms that weren't their choice were contacted by Webb's team and informed that their cases were being reviewed and that they had the right to formal remediation proceedings. One of them, Emily didn't know her name, didn't ask, had reportedly been out of nursing for 2 years, had left the profession entirely after what had happened at Redstone. That was the thing that sat with Emily in a way that Cole's face in the hallway didn't. Not because it was dramatic, because it was quiet, because that was how this kind of damage worked. Not in the big visible moments, but in the private decisions that people made when they'd been hurt enough times that they stopped trying. The woman who had become a nurse had trained and studied and built that capacity in herself, and had then left it behind in a town in Montana because the institution that was supposed to uphold standards had used those standards as a weapon. That was what Cole and Briggs and Rast and all the carefully maintained machinery of their arrangement had actually cost. Not the investigation, not the charges, not the embarrassment. That woman, out of nursing for 2 years, deciding in some private moment that the thing she'd built herself to do was no longer something she could do. Emily thought about that a lot in the days that followed. The offer came from Voss's office on Friday, 8 days after the explosion. It was formal, a letter, not a call, which indicated that someone had considered it carefully before sending it. The offer was a position with a federal medical response unit, a specialized team that operated at the intersection of military medicine and federal investigative support, providing trauma care in environments that civilian medical infrastructure couldn't or wouldn't reach. The position would use her actual qualifications. The position would involve her actual background, documented and acknowledged, not filed away in a sealed record and worked around. The salary was higher. The location was not Ashford, Montana. The work was the work she'd originally trained for, in a context that didn't require her to pretend she was something simpler than she was. She sat with the letter at her kitchen table for a long time. Then she called Rosa. Rosa picked up immediately. Emily said, "I need to tell you something." "The offer," Rosa said. Emily paused. "How do you know about the offer?" "I don't know about the offer, but you have that voice." "What voice?" "The one where you've already decided something and you're going to tell me what it is." Emily looked at the letter. "They're offering me a position, Federal Medical Unit, not here." Rosa was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a person processing news they expected and don't like but have already accepted. "When?" "I haven't answered yet. I wanted to tell you first because you came to my door with a casserole on a Monday night when I had a suspension notice on my table, and I didn't say thank you for that." Emily: "I mean it." Rosa made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. "You went into a burning building. We're past thank yous at this point." A pause. "Are you going to take it?" "Yes," Emily said. "I think I have to." "Because it's the right work." "Because it's what I can actually do." She paused. "Because staying here means spending the next year watching proceedings and being the person that all of this happened to, and I'm not interested in that being who I am." "You're never going to be just that," Rosa said. "You know that, right? The statement, the 14 people. Tom Orwick finally turning in that folder. None of that goes back in the box just because you leave." Emily thought about the woman who had been out of nursing for 2 years, and about the formal remediation proceedings being opened for her case. She thought about whether that woman would go back to nursing, and knew she didn't know the answer, and knew that was something that would resolve or not resolve independently of anything Emily did now. "I know," Emily said. "Then go do the work," Rosa said, "and call me when you get wherever you're going." She left Ashford on a Tuesday, which was not a day she'd chosen for any particular reason. It was simply when the contractors finished processing her departure from the housing, when the federal paperwork cleared, when the logistics aligned. She packed the same bag she'd arrived with 2 years ago and 2 boxes that she shipped ahead, and that was everything. Farwell shook her hand at the hospital entrance before her last shift ended. "I'm submitting a formal commendation to accompany the record," he said. "Your name, your actions, Thursday morning. It'll sit with the declassified portions." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He looked at her with the straightforward quality of a man who has been reconsidering his mental model of several things for the past week and a half, and has arrived at a new one. "I want it on record that this institution had someone like you and what it chose to do with that." She thanked him. She meant it. Tom Orwick was at the nurse's station, end of his shift, still in scrubs. He didn't make a speech. He said, "Safe travels," and she said, "Keep documenting," and he said, "Always." And that was the right ending for that particular conversation. She drove out through the main gate at 1640, the guard waving her through in the ordinary way of exits that don't know they're final. The base in the rearview mirror looked exactly like what it was, a collection of beige concrete buildings in a flat Montana valley, ordinary from the outside, carrying everything that had happened inside it invisibly, the way all places carry their history invisibly. She watched it until the road curved and it was gone. The charges against Ethan Cole were finalized 6 weeks later. Conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority, falsification of official records, conspiracy to suppress complaints. He was stripped of his rank at a formal proceeding that was attended by Webb's team and by Colonel Maddox and by 3 people whose names were in Tom Orwick's folder. The proceeding was public. The outcome was public. The specific thing Cole had spent 21 years building, the authority, the record, the particular social gravity of a man who never seemed to doubt himself, was dismantled in a room with institutional lighting and a court reporter and a legal officer reading charges aloud in a level voice. He did not appeal the findings. Briggs received a federal criminal conviction on the obstruction charge and a separate administrative discharge proceeding that concluded the same week. He was the kind of man who had always understood institutions as tools, had built his career on knowing how to use them, and spent the proceedings watching his understanding fail him in real time. His attorney's renegotiation attempt had not been successful because the evidence Foss provided, combined with the original investigation, left no room for a more favorable arrangement. He served his sentence. His name appeared once more in a public document 2 years later, in the index of a federal report on institutional accountability in military medical facilities as a case study. Rast left medicine. It was not a dramatic exit. No public statement, no ceremony. He simply did not seek another position after Redstone, and after a period of time that determination became permanent. Whether that was consequence or choice was a distinction that probably didn't matter as much as the outcome. Foss received reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation, which was the agreement, and spent 18 months on administrative probation. He had kept the documents for 2 years. That was not nothing. Whether it was enough was a harder question, the kind that doesn't have a clean answer. The kind that lives with people rather than resolving. Emily reported to her new posting on a Wednesday in November, which was nobody's symbolic choice. It was the first day of the assignment, determined by administrative calendars. The unit was small. The work was specific. The environment did not require her to file paperwork explaining skills she wasn't supposed to have, or to pretend that her first 2 years of employment history was the whole story, or to make herself smaller than she was, so that the space around her would feel comfortable to people who hadn't earned their comfort. She was, for the first time in 2 years, working as exactly the person she was. That sounds like a simple thing. It isn't. Most people spend a significant portion of their working lives performing a version of themselves that fits the available container, and the container at Redstone had been built around a false file, maintained by people with an interest in not knowing more. And Emily had lived inside it, competently, quietly, doing the work, until the moment she submitted a tournament entry form at 600 on a morning when she'd been awake for 19 hours, in the specific way of a person who has been patient for long enough. She thought sometimes about what that decision had cost. The investigation, the proceedings, the phone calls, the Sunday morning statement, the 4 months of formal testimony. The specific weight of being the person that all of it happened to, rather than the person who had moved through a base for 2 years and been left alone. She thought about whether she'd do it again, which is the kind of question that's easy to answer in retrospect. She'd do it again. Not because it went well, not because she'd known it would. She'd submitted that form because she was 30 years old and had spent 7 years becoming a specific kind of capable and 2 years pretending she wasn't. And the distance between those two things had accumulated into something that needed to move. What she hadn't known, couldn't have known, walking to the tournament coordinator's door at 0600, was that the distance was the same distance 14 other people had been living with. That her decision to stop making herself smaller would give Tom Orwick a reason to carry his folder into the right room. That Rose's casserole on a Monday night was one small piece of a structure that held when it needed to. That's the thing about silence. It feels like a personal decision when you're inside it. It feels like you're the only one making it. And then something shifts, and you find out how many other people have been making the same decision in the same building, and you understand that the silence was never yours alone. It was shared, maintained, kept in place by the collective weight of everyone who had decided the cost of speaking was too high. The cost is always there. That doesn't change. What changes is the calculation. The woman who had left nursing 2 years ago, after what had happened to her at Redstone, she called the remediation proceedings office in December, 8 weeks after they'd reached out. Emily didn't know this. She found out much later, through Webb, who mentioned it in an email about the formal case close. The woman had enrolled in a refresher certification program. She was going back. That was not Emily's doing. That woman had made her own decision, in her own time, for her own reasons. But the proceedings that made the option real, the investigation that reopened the case, the 14 incidents finally fully documented and formally reviewed, those were the result of a chain of decisions that started with a tournament entry form and a cold Sunday morning run and a person who had decided, finally, that her lane was wherever the work needed doing. Emily ran her 5 miles every morning at the new posting, different roads, different cold, the same pace. She carried her own hand wraps. She ate what was available. She did the work. She was exactly where she belonged. And for the first time in a long time, everyone around her knew it.